Farming food and fashion for a discerning world is serious business in Aotearoa, New Zealand. There are new opportunities everywhere just waiting for the open-minded. Sarah's Country shines a light on the matters that matter most. And here's your host, Sarah Perriam.
Kia ora and welcome to Sarah's Country, where we strive to keep you ahead of the game on the important matters to farming, food and fashion here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I think I'm quite okay in saying that the biggest challenge that we face in farming and growing food and fibre is how we're going to adapt to a changing climate. Globally, there are international targets to reduce greenhouse gas by 20% below the 2005 levels. And this is a target between 2021 and 2030. Here in New Zealand, we have our own domestic targets of 10% reduction by 2030 and to reach a net zero emissions position 20 years after that. So by 2025, that's only 4.5 years away, a primary industry collaboration between industry, bodies and government are ramping up the efforts in a program to equip farmers and growers with the information, tools and support they will need to reduce emissions and, of course, build that so important resilience to climate change. Even with faster methods of spreading knowledge these days and technological advancements happening quicker, there is still a lot to achieve when you think about it. To have all farm businesses' environment plans to include how they will mitigate emissions, but more so in how they will be incentivized to have effective carbon sinks on their properties that will require a development of an appropriate pricing scheme as well. So much to do. I'm your host, Sarah Perriam, and in this week's Opinion Maker, which we broadcast on Tuesdays, so you can kick back from 7 o'clock on Sarah's Country's Facebook page. And for those who don't have Facebook, Sarah's Country's website as well, sarahscountry.com. Of course, everything is available on podcast for our growing audience there straight after. Now, if you have any thoughts or opinions that you would like to share about what you've heard throughout this program, please feel free to get in touch direct with me on email, sarah@sarahscountry.com, and so we can continue to work on the important conversations that we need to have as an industry going forward. Now, by the end of 2022, New Zealand farmers and growers will need to know their greenhouse gas emissions. So the big question is, where do we start? But firstly, I feel it's important that we actually grasp the understanding of why we need to know our number and how it can actually be a good thing. Think about the collective evidence that we will build around pastoral farming in New Zealand and how we can demonstrate our carbon position collectively, and potentially that we are not a major contributor to global warming, but we are doing our bit. What tools are there currently to measure livestock's nitrous, oxide and methane emissions, or measure our on-farm sequestration rates? I've been asking this for some time, and there is a lot of tools and resources available. We're going to unpack that throughout this week's Sarah's Country Opinion Maker. Also breaking down the Climate Change Commission's advice and Waka. You may have heard the name, but what is it? It's a primary sector climate action partnership, and they have some key milestones to discuss with us. So coming up in this Opinion Maker show, we have the Waka Program Director Kelly Forster, Nick Tate from Dairy NZ and Karina Jordan from Beef and Lamb will join us on the panel to close. But also too, throughout the show, I'm looking forward to heading to the Bay of Plenty to catch up with a farmer, Rick Burke, who has had their farm's greenhouse gas numbers independently researched and verified. Was it hard? And what was the outcomes? Rick will join us. First up, though, we want to understand who is Waka and how do they plan to achieve their ambitious goal of having all farmers calculate greenhouse gas emissions in only a few years. How do we know our number? All that before this very short video here on ways to reduce emissions.
This is Sarah's Country. Join the conversation. Have thoughts on an interview? Or have you got questions you want answered by a future guest? Let us know. Email sarah@sarahscountry.com.
Farmers have been asking, what can I do to reduce emissions on my farm? Well, there are 3 gases we need to reduce: carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide and methane. But on farm, it's particularly about the last 2. Lots of small steps can add up to make a big difference.
The good news is that greenhouse gas emissions from New Zealand agriculture are no longer going up, thanks to farmers' efforts to become more and more productive and efficient over the years. As a result, greenhouse gases emitted per unit of product are going down.
Without all this great work, emissions from agriculture in New Zealand would be about 30% higher than now to produce the same amount of food. But we need to reduce emissions, not just keep them steady. There's no magical formula here, but there are several things that can be done on farms right now, and some will have other benefits too. You know your business better than anyone, so you're in the best place to work out which of these are achievable.
Here's what some farmers are doing already that you might want to consider for your farm. First, find out what your farm's greenhouse gas emissions are and include them in your planning. Depending on the farm, it might be that some of those options can save you time and money. In a nutshell, methane emissions are related to the total amount of dry matter eaten. Nitrous oxide emissions depend on the total amount of nitrogen going through your farm via feed and fertiliser. So what steps can we take to change these quantities while still running a profitable business?
Look carefully at the feeds used. Can you use feeds with lower nitrogen or higher energy content to get animals to market quicker? Would a less intensive system work for you? It might be reducing fertiliser inputs and stocking rates, changing the ratio of your stock type, or a once-a-day milking. You could try using precision technologies for improving the amount and timing of your fertiliser application.
Look at the balance between individual animal performance and stocking rate. Could you run slightly fewer animals and focus more on getting the most out of each animal to keep production up? You could also consider the balance of your land use to reduce livestock emissions. Many farmers are now integrating trees onto their less productive land, and there is government support to help do this. For some farms, diversifying some of the land use to cropping or horticulture could reduce overall emissions and dependence on one income stream.
Rest assured, you're not alone in your efforts. Scientists are working hard on new solutions with some very promising results. Some of them are being trialled already. In the future, it's likely we'll be able to breed low methane animals or use inhibitors and vaccinations to reduce the amount of methane that animals belch out. We're all working towards the same goal, and any small step is a step in the right direction.
Remember to check out our website for lots more information. Thanks for watching.
Well, what grew out of discussions on how to support pastoral farming to play its part in global efforts to tackle climate change? It was a group of Aotearoa New Zealand's food and fibre sector leaders that put forward a pathway in how we would reduce our emissions. Waka Noa, the primary sector climate change commitment is with government, agrees to work with the primary sector and iwi Māori to equip farmers and growers with knowledge and tools they need to reduce emissions, increase integrated sequestration on farms, and adapt to a changing climate alongside the environmental measurements they already are doing on farm. Now, as Program Director for Waka Noa, our next guest, Kelly Forster, was a Senior Policy Analyst in the Agriculture and Climate Change team for the Ministry for the Environment, and was seconded to the Interim Climate Change Committee during 2018-19 to work with the committee's inquiry on agricultural emissions. Kelly was previously an environmental planner at Waikato Regional Council, as well as has a deep connection to her sheep and beef farming family and roots, where she is currently joining us. Kelly, it must be lovely to be back up at the farm where you grew up.
It sure is. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I don't know if you can see the background out there, but the beautiful wild west coast raging behind me here.
And an incredible background. You've been at the table, and this is why you are in such an influential and important role as Program Director of He Waka Eke Noa. Can you tell us about the key highlights and outcomes that the industry collaboration has had to date?
I think the first key highlight is that we are committed to this way of working and working in partnership. So as you've already said, the primary industry has spearheaded this approach of a partnership with the government and Māori to respond to the challenge that climate change is facing for our sector. And so the way of working itself, I think, is a key highlight. In partnership, the program itself is made up of a steering group from representatives across government and sector, and then within the work streams, lots of people sitting across the different agencies, all contributing time and kind to coming up with the solutions to these challenges. So that's one highlight. Another highlight is we have recently released 2 key documents which support our mission, as you've introduced, of implementing that framework to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that measuring, managing, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, maintaining, increasing sequestration, and responding to a changing climate. So these 2 key documents is the latest farm planning guidance for greenhouse gas emissions, and the first assessment of tools and calculators that farmers and growers can use to know their numbers, nitrous oxide and methane. And those are really important things because they will support farmers and growers to have a clear understanding of their farm greenhouse gas emissions, and then have the knowledge to make informed decisions about the actions that they can take in the context of their specific farming business to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase sequestration. So I guess those would be the 3 highlights: the way of working, and then those 2 key pieces of work, the farm plan guidance and the first assessment of the tools that are readily available.
Yeah, always important on a mission to outline the framework and the boundaries and provide the guidance on which way it's going, because there is some considerable partners involved across all of our industry bodies, our Crown Research Institutes. The message is very clear from you. Know your number and have a plan. But the big question I'm hearing from farmers is, where do you even start to know your number? And how can it work with existing planning with so much going on farm these days?
Yeah, the farm planning guidance that we have recently released was developed in the context of broader environmental farm planning. And so now that the guidance has been developed, our industry partners are working to integrate it into those existing industry assurance programs. So if farmers are engaged in their industry assurance program, they will be seeing the content of that guidance document. Then on the greenhouse gas tools and calculators, there is a suite of tools already readily available. Some are simple, so a farmer could pick it up and use it themselves with basic input data like stock numbers. There are also some farmers that are already using Overseer and FarmX, which each contain a greenhouse gas calculator as well. There are also tools being developed by Beef and Lamb with the support of meat processors and banks and accountants, and that will be released very soon, and will be another key way that farmers can use the existing data that they've got, the data that they're giving their accountant, or the data that they might already be collecting through their farm plan, and use it to input into that tool.
Yeah, there's some incredible resources and how, whatever, if you're a dairy farmer, a grower, a sheep and beef or deer farmer, these existing from NZFAP Plus through to the programs that Sinlay's Lead with Pride and Fonterra's Taiyaki programs are already doing. So congratulations, because it certainly is a huge target to have, by the end of 2022, everyone effectively knowing their number. Now, when we say know our number, the big question I have is that a net number, and how do we measure sequestration?
Understanding sequestration in the context of your farming system and in the context of your emissions is really important. And some of the tools that are available do enable you to calculate that. We are continuing to do work as a program alongside those existing tools on ways to recognise sequestration, which hasn't been recognised in the ETS. That's a particular focus of part of our policy program, which is also looking at the approach to a alternative pricing mechanism to the emissions trading scheme.
Oh, yes, and I do want to jump into that, because knowing our gross emissions, that would be step number one, at least understand what we're admitting, and then work through the next part, which is sequestration. When it comes to gross emissions, is it just going to be as simple as the science we have now, which is to just reduce livestock and, cut down on fertiliser and cut down on diesel?
There are a broader set of options, and you'll see those in the farm planning guidance to be able to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and maintain your productivity, your profitability. That there's not a massive suite, but there is a suite of options. Another part of our program is not doing the science, but supporting coordination of that investment in further opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And you may have heard, some of the things in the pipeline, like a methane inhibitor, different grass types and species, and different ways to reduce your nitrous oxide. Those are all that deep science is happening. And what's important to our program is making sure that when those new options come on board, that they can be recognised in our farm system as well.
Do you think that we have enough lead-in time for that type of science? We had John McEwen from Ag Research on Ceres Country previously discussing, the lengthy time it's taken to breed low methane sheep. And will we be able to achieve that type of level of science and the accuracy that policy will want from that science before implementing it, or before these lofty target goals?
What we do know is that there are mitigations available now that farmers can do to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So there is enough for us to be chasing after now. And then what's important is that our system can accommodate new technologies, because that science is going to continue, forever. So what's important is that our system can accommodate that as it comes on stream.
Fantastic. So it's all about those big, lofty, low-hanging fruits first, and then start to tweak and dial. No, I'm enjoying what you're saying there. And I mean, the other thing we need to learn how to move the dial on is all farmers is a large group of people. We are going to be speaking to Rick Burke later, and we do have our early adopters, our Balanced Farm Environment Award winners, the people that sit in executive levels across the country. But how do we move the dial on all farmers' attitudes towards agricultural emissions contribution to climate change, when there continues to still be so much debate around its investment, particularly when farmers can be a big part of the solution as well? It must be a hard mission to get, that next 50%, so to speak, on board.
And it is. And I think that's the beauty of this partnership approach. And some of the, our partners are also the processors. As you've already mentioned, some of the dairy programs that are underway. Meat processors are also engaging. And I think as more of the farming sector see the commitment of their industry bodies and their processors to this program and its objectives, that will start to reach farmers who haven't, who have been focused on other things for now, not doing nothing, but focused on other priorities. But this is an important priority, and it is coming, and our partners that will start to really dial up their campaigns around Know Your Number.
Absolutely. So our last parting advice, there's a lot of rural service professionals that support farmers and growers that listen to Cirrus Country I am aware of. What type of language would you like them to be using in having conversations in the paddock around that this is more than reducing stock numbers and counting pine trees?
That's a great question, Sarah. The message I think that is really critical is that there is information out there for farmers so that they can make informed decisions on actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that's specific to the context of their farm. And that information is going to be starting to come through the Farm Environment Plan, the industry assurance programs that farmers will already be involved in, and wrapped around that know your numbers, those greenhouse gas calculators. So I guess supporting farmers to know where those tools are, wrapping your head around them yourselves as a rural professional. And one thing that we're really conscious of is that, this is, for some people, I remember talking to some farmers a couple of years ago, this is Star Trek stuff. And it's actually kind of bringing it down to a farm system. And if we're successful, it'll be mainstreaming understanding your greenhouse gas emissions in your farming profile.
Mainstreaming. And the thing is too, is we can actually move forward when we can visualise success. And by knowing your number, you can visualise that success. Thank you so much for your time. Program Director for Waka Ekanoa, Kelly Forster. Now coming up to continue on the theme around knowing your number in this week's Opinion Maker, around the ambitious target set by the primary sector to have all New Zealand farmers knowing their number by the end of 2022. We're going to head to the Bay of Plenty to discuss some positive outcomes that have come out of one farmer calculating his farm's greenhouse gas emissions. All that with Rick Burke up here shortly on Cirrus Country.
This is Cirrus Country. Catch the latest on the matters that matter most wherever you are. Listen to Cirrus Country on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple or Google Podcasts. Try asking Alexa or Siri. Play Cirrus Country on podcast.
One of the first things you learn when you live out here
is where to shop for the things you need to live out here.
like electric fencing,
or horse feed,
or bee suits,
children,
chook food.
Do you want a couple of these?
Or something stylish to wear. Not everyone's got stuff like this.
But at Farmlands we do, and then some.
So if you need anything to help your farm,
Grow, milk, drench.
Rhea, come on in.
Because we're out here too.
Well, as we unpack as part of this week's Opinion Maker show about knowing your number and having a plan, we are discussing how knowing what your farm's greenhouse gas emissions number is and where they come from is the first step towards reducing them, in a combination, of course, with what the sequestration rates could potentially be and what that incentivised program could look like. There's still so much going on in terms of monitoring our greenhouse gas targets, going into farmers and growers knowing their number by 2022. However, our next guest puts it that you may be pleasantly surprised to learn that you could be calling your farm. This ambitious target set by the primary sector to have all farmers knowing their number is a very ambitious target and could it really be achievable by 2022 and more than a theory around a board table? Well, we're heading now to just south of Katikati, up near the Kaimai Ranges, on a 310 hectare property, Pukakuru Farms, where farmer Rick Burke has had him and his wife Jan's farms greenhouse gas numbers independently verified and researched by Ag First's Phil Jeannot. And Rick joins us now. Rick, welcome. And firstly, can you talk us through the process of how you started to collect the evidence of greenhouse gas emissions on your property?
Okay, yes, no, great to be on your show, Sarah. I was approached by the Greenhouse Gas Research Centre to get involved in with a group of farmers from from other sectors to really promote knowing your number. So until then, I had no idea. But we'd done a fair bit of environmental work, really focused on improving our fresh water, because where we are in the Kaimo Ranges here, the farm had some real issues with sediment. So back in the 90s, we were approached by the regional council to really tidy the farm up, and that was a great way of redesigning the farm, becoming more efficient. So until I was approached, I had no idea what my numbers were like. So the process we went through was being part of a video around knowing your numbers, was where we had Phil Juneau, as you mentioned, come to the farm. So I was very fortunate. I had good records going back to the late 90s, and we're on cash manager, so we had some really good cash manager records 2015, and we did a projection for 2021. And I was really surprised. I thought it'd be really complicated, but Phil came in, really professional. He asked me the right questions about our inputs. We had all the records around our live weight gains, etc., so we could determine how efficient we were in growing our beef and sheep and lambs. We knew how much grass we're growing. We had inputs like little bits of nitrogen and fertiliser, crops, etc., thrown into the mix, and out comes a number. Phil did, however, have all our physical attributes of the farm put in front of him, because we just recently wanted to see if we're carbon neutral. So we had Pete Olsen actually do an evaluation of our whole farm with our plantings, our riparian, our wetlands, and everything like that to do it. So we had all those age groups of those trees, the production trees, the wetlands, etc., that we could put in front of him, which made it quite easy for him. But he managed to gather that information amazingly in about 4 hours, and off he went, and then a day or so later produced some numbers. So it was really cool.
Oh, I have so many questions for you, but it may be for someone listening thinking, well, that's all right for Rick being a pin-up boy with all the resources at him to show us how, but what about myself and the current tools that are available? What can I already use that is part of my environmental planning to start to do the work that physically the likes of Phil Juneau and the other consultants can do for you as well?
Yes, well, as I understand, there's Overseer, and there's another number of other tools that you can, with the help of a consultant, do that evaluation on your farm. So Beef and Lamb are just coming out with a tool around, you can put the inputs in, and it'll give you an idea of numbers too. So this is an evolving process, but I'd encourage farmers, especially after my experience, if they've done, and the sheep and beef industry's got a really good story to tell, in that if you think back to 1990, where the baseline settings were around the Kyoto Agreement, a lot of farmers will have records going back into the 90s, so they can say, well, how well have I gone? And are we increasing our emissions, or are we decreasing our emissions? So, and I'd suggest a lot of the sheep and beef guys have remain relatively neutral or decreased if they've done their land environmental plan, if they've done some plantings on their farm and become more efficient. So, but yeah, I'd say, Sarah, there's lots of tools out there to tap into to find out how you're going.
And I understand that the mitigator is one that you use and has been really helpful to be an overarching tool in so many ways as well. But Rick, the challenge is to have all farmers. And when we talk about all farmers, that's a whole different game, isn't it, than early adopters. I mean, the likes of yourself, you're on the Farmer Council, you've been a supreme winner of the Bay of Plenty Balanced Farm Environment Awards. I'm not so worried about that top 30%, but the next, 70% of all farmers over 80 hectares it will be, to know all numbers by the end of next year, when there's so many other things to focus on a day-to-day basis. Do you really believe it's achievable, and what would be your one thing that you think will make it achievable?
Yes, look, I think it's going to be a really hard ask. As you said, Sarah, the look at the bell-shaped curve, those ones to the right will hop on this really quickly and more out of interest sake to see how I'm tracking. But for some of the other farmers that are early in the stages of even redesigning their farms, I think will find it difficult to get their head around it. But look, the principal driver of this is your farm environmental plan, as I see it. And of course, we had the focus on around essential fresh water, and that's what got me going, was thinking about our farm and its effect on the environment down into our harbour here, and thinking, well, what do I need to do to improve fresh water? And then it sort of evolved from there. So we did a land environmental plan back in the mid-90s. So what I'm saying is, if farmers can start off with that land environmental plan, they will get it, because they'll understand what they need to do in terms of fresh water. And then they start thinking about, look, I'm improving biodiversity with all these plantings, and what does my carbon footprint like if I do that? So that gives a really good starting point. So we often talk about fresh water, biodiversity, and greenhouse gases as silos, but they're actually inextricably linked if you think about it that way.
And the big thing to link it into the mix as well, to actually make a lot of these barriers come down, is the ultimate link to profitability. And you have got a unique story that is, of course, the case, that your farm has improved its water quality as well as being the most profitable ever. Would you be able to explain a bit more around that, Rick?
Yes, well, look, going back to the farm plan, I know, sort of being involved with Beef and Land, we're pushing a natural capital approach, and that's really identifying the physical attributes of your farm and then understanding the land use capability. And when you do that, you can break your farm into land management units. And that's really powerful, Sarah, because it enables you to think about how you optimise your land, and that might be around retiring it altogether and leaving it in Ngāhere, bringing, identifying overland flow, water, where the water's going, where the contaminants are going, so you can create wetlands, sediment bunds, sediment traps around the farm. On the farm side, you're thinking, well, how do I optimise this parcel of land? It might be class 2 land or whatever. So it really turns on light bulbs in that if you think about redesigning those very good bits of your farm, getting infrastructure in terms of fencing, water, and then adopting good farm systems, trying to grow as much high quality feed as you can, because essentially we're grass farmers, focusing on soil health, all those sort of things. Suddenly you're actually becoming a lot more efficient. You're growing animals a lot more efficiently, especially if you're having the right stock class and the right land class and the right numbers, per hectare or whatever. So you get two things happening. You get this win for freshwater biodiversity, and you have this win for profitability as you go. And there's a lot of work being done around the introduction of water and fencing, and we did the numbers ourselves, and it showed about a 35-40% return on capital, and people don't believe that. In fact, I said to my brother that did the numbers, we got to talk that back a bit, because it's seriously good. So I think going back to those farm plans, if the farmers have a consultant sitting alongside them, and the farmer actually goes through his farm, puts on the handbrake and resets how he's thinking, and goes through that farm, and works through the farm environmental plan, take that natural capital approach, he'll see opportunities, seriously good opportunities. So from that, you could evaluate where you could track in terms of profitability. You can evaluate where you could track in terms of reducing your greenhouse gas numbers and doing a whole lot of good stuff on your farm. So I see this as taking our farms to a whole new future stage. Future-proofing our farms for generations to come. That's what we're effectively doing through the farm environmental plan.
Yeah, effectively bringing everything up collectively together is what I'm hearing from you, Rick. And lastly, the big thing that we really want to talk about is how did you effectively achieve to say that you have found out from your numbers that you are cooling as opposed to warming? Should we be talking around that terminology as opposed to a number?
Yes, I think you can see how you're tracking quite easily by if you've got those records and you can look at different years and maybe over a 10-year period or whatever, or if you've got records going back further, and just see how you're tracking. And one thing that's missing, Sarah, is that we haven't even, I know my numbers, but how does that compare to the landscape, Simon? And I think this is the next step for the Climate Change Commission, is to actually put out some guideline numbers for the farmers. And I believe the way to do it and to really incentivise them to transition to a better state is to look at the grass growth curve. I mentioned before, we're all grass farmers. So if you look at the grass growth curve on your landscape, on your soils, on your slopes, we've got enough information to come up with how much grass we're growing. I mean, there's records going back to 1945 around that. We could establish a guideline number for farmers. So on my farm, on my landscape, I could have a number. So this is where you could go. We want you to go to with this. So there'll be many farmers that will need to aim for that number. There'll be some that have already achieved it, and there might be some that are already under it. If you think about where we were back in 1990, perhaps. So I challenge it.
The only thing I can see wrong with that, Rick, is that if we farm just to our grass curve and not to when the market dictates based on price our product, a lot of things would be better. Yes.
Yes, but it's all about how efficiently we turn that dry matter into live weight production. So you get a certain amount of grass growing a year, and it's how efficiently you convert that. So I think we need to have some guidelines for farmers to aim for.
Yeah, sounds fantastic. I really appreciate your time, Rick Burke there, talking to us from just south of the Kaimai Ranges. And, excuse me, not only a Balance Supreme Farm Environment Award winner, but of course a man that knows his numbers when it comes to his greenhouse gas emissions, and effectively was a positive outcome. So highly encouraging you to know your number and have a plan. And that is what we will continue to discuss with our panel. Dairy NZ and Beef and Lamb will join us to talk around how they're incorporating both science and farm planning guidance into their existing farm environment plans to make taking the guesswork out of this and achieving this target of all farmers knowing their number by 2022. Nick Tate and Karina Jordan will be up with us shortly here on Sarah's Country.
This is Sarah's Country. Join the conversation. Have thoughts on an interview? Or have you got questions you want answered by a future guest? Let us know. Email sarah@sarahscountry.com.
Oh, nice boots.
Yeah, thanks. They're new.
Ben, you alright?
Oh, yeah, sorry, mate. Just meerkatting pretty hard, eh? Yeah, I just said to myself, Ben, work hard. You deserve new boots.
Well, the Climate Change Commission's message is clear to farming in New Zealand. Know your number and have a plan to mitigate or reduce emissions, because there's some lofty targets and time is not on our side, with the goal to have all farms in Aotearoa, New Zealand needing to know their greenhouse gas numbers. How do we make it simple? And part of what's already happening on farm. Well, since December last year, industry bodies have been incorporating the science and guidance into their existing farm environment plans to their levy-paying farmers. As part of this week's Opinion Maker, Know Your Number and Have a Plan, on our panel today, we have Karina Jordan, who's now General Manager for North Island and for Beef and Lamb, and Nick Tate, Dairy NZ Senior Solutions and Development Specialist, joining us us now. Nick and Karina, welcome to Sarah's Country. I really want to start with each of you sort of summarising for us what the framework of the Farm Environment Plan under Dairy NZ and Beef and Lamb is already in place, and how we can simplify this to achieve that ambitious target of all farmers knowing their number by next year. Nick, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So, yes, we have a framework, obviously, for farm environment plans, and integrating greenhouse gases as part of the guidance that came out from Waka is really important. We've done that over the last number of years through our Dairy Tomorrow strategy and through our milk processing companies. So, a lot of them are already providing those farm environment plans to farmers. About a quarter of our dairy farmers already have a farm environment plan with some form of greenhouse gas module. So that's a really good starting point for farmers to understand their emissions and then start developing a plan around what they can do or options to reduce or mitigate emissions, and obviously account for on-farm sequestration as well.
Karina?
For the red meat sector is not a new concept. The sector's been doing it for the last 30 years, mainly focused around soil and erosion protection. So this journey into looking across those other pillars of the environment, such as climate, and as part of that GHG emissions is just an adjunct or an inclusion into what we've already been doing. Beef and Lamb's just built a GHG calculator, which is going to be available online shortly, and our survey is already looking at the GHG profile of the sector, which includes sequestration, just about 352 farms, and statistically representative of the sector. So, and shortly we'll be running out also our workshops to enable farmers to calculate their GHG emissions and sequestration on farm in a peer environment, which assists with peer-to-peer learning and farmer ownership of these profiles and the relevance to their businesses.
Well, fantastic to hear that calculator's on its way, Karina. Something that I know will be music to a lot of our listeners' ears, because it's been something that we've been wanting. But of course, you can never jump the gun on these things, especially with such a fast-moving thing. It is quite scary, the concept of knowing your number and having that out there in a peer environment. But it certainly will be something I can imagine will be talking points around regional New Zealand. Nick, what sort of extension work is really crucial, not only from Dairy NZ, but from rural service professionals across the country to really be on that same page, sharing that same message and driving towards everyone knowing their number?
Yeah, you've highlighted a really good point there, Sarah, where we've all got to get on the same page and obviously delivering the same information to farmers, particularly for dairy farmers. It's important to note that 95% of dairy farmers received an emissions report through their milk supply company in the last year. So that gives them a really good starting point to understand their numbers or their greenhouse gas emissions, and then start thinking about where they come from and what options they've got to obviously manage them. In terms of extension, our milk supply companies have a number of milk supply managers or sustainable dairying advisors that can help farmers understand their numbers or their emissions, and that's kind of where a lot of farmers will go for information. Dairy NZ also has a program that we've had up and running for the last 2 years called Step Change, which really is through extension and discussion groups and other mediums, really is helping farmers to look at options to reduce their environmental footprint and maintain or improve profitability. So it's kind of looking at that, not only your water quality or your nutrient losses, but your emissions and your profitability in kind of a holistic approach. So that's been running for about 2 years. So that's, if farmers want to get involved with that, that's they can look at Step Change on the Dairy NZ website, and it's a lot of information there for them.
Karina, before your role and now General Manager of North Island, you've been involved as an environmental policy lead and involved heavily in farmers understanding some very complex topics between Indigenous biodiversity, fresh water quality. Now you've got another big chunky one. What works when it comes to extension?
Oh, it's really, there's a lot of noise out there, isn't there? So I think this talks to also the point that Nick made. It's really important that as agricultural leaders and providers, we're all on the same page and we can simplify that narrative down so that farmers understand what's coming at them and the value that different approaches provide to their farming businesses, including building resilience. The approach that we're taking at Beef and Lamb is to think about the farm system, and farmers do this naturally, as a holistic unit. It's not just water or biodiversity or soils or a farm business and stock, all in isolation. It's how these things work together. And so I think the best way of getting information to farmers is to provide that holistic picture and look at what can be done that provides value across that farming business and builds that farming business resilience. And so that's the approach we're also taking to GHG emissions. And thinking about how we adjust to a changing climate going forward. And that's not even if you don't believe in climate change, that's even just thinking about our weather patterns and how they're changing at the moment compared to how they have been in the past. So we'll be building, we've already got extension programs out there that farmers can connect to. We've got delivery ready workshops such as Trees and Carbon on Farm, which looks at the multiple benefits that woody vegetation provides to our farming systems. And we'll be increasing our extension resources to farmers, and also I think starting to run some more train the trainers type extension programs for our agricultural professionals to make sure that we're all on the same page and providing consistent messages and opportunities for farmers.
Nick, what sort of opportunities exist for dairy farmers who don't have large-scale ability to offset and sequester carbon in a lot of flat dairy farms around New Zealand, where productivity has been the one thing that's been pushed right to every fence line and boundary? Is it all about reducing, or is Dairy NZ having those ongoing conversations around on-farm sequestration on dairy farms that can be measured into this pricing system that is being talked about from a policy perspective as well?
Yeah, look, there are some options around mitigating emissions, but there are also options, particularly even for flat farms, around on-farm sequestration. Think about tree blocks or shelter belts or riparian areas that don't meet the NZETS requirements. I mean, they're really important to have that holistic picture of not only emissions, but what obviously you have in terms of sequestration on farm as well. In terms of mitigation, the really things that we're kind of saying through our programs is to really look at your nitrogen surplus on farm, so your inputs minus your outputs, and what you can kind of look at in terms of being a bit more efficient there through better use of fertilizers and feeds and effluent and things like that. So really focusing on that, because that will have a co-benefit for water quality as well. And then in terms of methane, and methane's a really hard one. Methane, it's really about the efficiency of the farm system, so making sure that every kilogram of dry matter eaten on farm turns into product, and trying to really focus on the efficiency of the farm system and the animal.
Karina, this pricing system that's being recommended to ministers next year and to be up and functioning by 2025, how are those conversations going to go? Because there's a lot of grey area there too.
And that's right. I mean, through here, Waka it's really a partnership approach. So it's the primary industries at the table with iwi and with government, essentially, trying to work through all these details, and there's a lot of information there. What I think as a sector we're saying, or definitely actually what we're saying, and what Beef and Lamb's position is that if we're thinking about pricing, it's only one mechanism and a small mechanism within our wider toolkit that we have to, that we've got to put in front of farmers and for farmers to adopt. So we're saying that farm planning is probably the cornerstone extension delivery tool that we have here in relation to farmers understanding the opportunities for their farming businesses in this space. And the calculators also that we've got, like the GHG calculator and yardstick that we're going to be releasing shortly, are also key tools in here. So pricing should really just be on the margins. And I think we've got farmer reference groups that are up and running, and very much the conversation that they're having is ensuring that any pricing mechanism rewards early adopters, and that it's only on the margins, and that those that have done the right thing in the past or on the journey essentially those early adopters and those leaders are enabled to continue on their journey and not be penalised by any pricing mechanism. But obviously, this is early stages in the conversation. I mean, it's progressing quite quickly, but there's a lot of detail to be worked through. But I think Nick can talk to this as well. Very much our position is a holistic approach, recognise sequestration, and only price on the margins or where it's absolutely necessary to drive that behaviour change. As you know, for the red meat sector, we've already reduced our emissions by 30% since the 1990s. No pricing mechanism required. So there's other mechanisms that drive change where it's needed. And we're also not saying change is needed everywhere. We already know that we've got some amazing farmers out there, and they should not be asked to do any more heavy lifting than what they've already done.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Nick?
I agree. A pricing mechanism is only one of the tools in the toolkit. Obviously, it's going to be designed in He Waka He Noa, and as a response to not being in the NZ ETS. So it's really important that it's one of the tools, not the only tool. And we've got to provide those opportunities for farmers to understand their emissions and obviously look at options to reduce or increase sequestration as part of that suite of tools. And I agree, the vehicle for delivery, farm environment plans as a holistic approach is a really good way to look at how we can combine all those things of that toolkit into one kind of overarching plan.
I'm just in a little bit of a quick fire last question to both of you. You have your end of financial year, 30th of June is approaching, a couple of months. What is one key take home that you should be focusing on that's a low-hanging fruit to do in your respective industries and to start on this path? Nick?
Yeah, as I said before, 95% of our dairy farmers have received an emissions report this year. So my first thing to do in the before 30th of June is to actually pick that up, have a look at it, have a discussion with somebody to understand your sources of emissions, and then you can start thinking about what are my options, what can I think about in terms of potential solutions to reducing emissions, and it's really a planning phase for farmers to start having those conversations.
Karina?
Simply come along to a beef and lamb workshop with your peers and let's talk about this. Let's talk about it in relation to building business resilience and future-proofing the agricultural sector in New Zealand.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Nick Tate there from Dairy NZ and Karina Jordan from Beef and Lamb. Everyone is in this mission together, so it is definitely not a state of overwhelm. Well, before I give you a heads up on what themes are bringing our opinion makers to the table next week here on Serious Country, as well as the guests that we have for the rest of the week, I just have two very small things to remind you of. Now, we have established our very own weekly email newsletter to keep you up to date first on what's coming up on Serious Country a week in advance, and links direct to my favourite interviews from the past week. This is an email all about Serious Country, so you don't miss a beat. So please head to seriouscountry.com and you can be part of the first foundational members of the Serious Country Club. Now, our audience survey has told us a majority of you listen to the show on podcast, so we are focusing all of our attention in the coming months to podcasts. Currently, we're sitting around 24 on the science charts, and we would love to climb up a little bit further up that ladder, but we need your help. Please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review to help our ratings. Right, next week on our Opinion Maker, the theme around a new environmental report released on the 15th of April by our Ministry for the Environment and Stats NZ, which presents new data on New Zealand's land cover, soil quality and land fragmentation. As released on the 11th of May, this opinion maker will ask industry and growers on their reaction to the report that highlights the destruction of our urban sprawl on our highly nutrient-dense soils and what the flow-on effects of higher fertiliser use will be, because that's what we'll need to do to grow crops on poorer soils pushed away out further from our major cities. Now, the rest of the week, we have our wonderful Changemakers on Wednesdays and Fridays on podcast and on demand on seriouscountry.com. The number of electric farm bikes rounding up cows and sheep could increase in coming months thanks to a Tauranga-based electric motorbike company, UBCO, where they're introducing a subscription model with farm bikes. Interesting, and how they are going global. I'm going to fangirl a little bit over CEO Timothy Allen, who's going to be a change maker on Serious Country this week. I've been following UBCO for quite some time. And as part of our new Thought Makers, which is released on Thursday, and an audio-only podcasts. It's part of a series for the next 4 weeks leading up to an international webinar series called Multiscapes. I think you should go and check it out because there's certainly some incredible researchers from around the world coming together to discuss how we will design our food and landscapes into the future. So this week, we're going to be joined by an Australian professor, Ian Jordan, to discuss his hopes that grazing cattle could help with the rewilding or restoration of self-sustaining ecosystems whilst minimising human intervention and return to a natural state. So cattle can be very much a part of our wildscapes. In Friday's Changemaker this week, Pure Oil, a Canterbury rapeseed oil producer, is bringing sunflowers into the mix to build on a positive environmental story. Managing Director Nick Murney is a Serious Country Changemaker on Friday. And until we meet again, take care of yourself and keep working on that open heart and open mind because it will do you wonders. Harira.